Okay. So, chapter 21. We are hitting the turn of the century, and people are freaking out, which is going to lead us into World War One, basically. So, the title of the chapter is "The Crisis of Liberalism and the Making of Mass Society, 1880 to 1914." So, that's that. That's a lot of words that maybe don't mean anything to you. Hopefully, by the end of the chapter, they'll mean something. So, yeah. There's some French. It means the century's end. Again, turn of the century, 1800s are ending. We're entering the 1900s. So 19th century was coming to an end, and people were seeing it as a time of great change. Things would never be the same. A clean break with the past, which was kind of true. Although I mean, I'm a bit biased with my professor, but the 19th century doesn't truly end until 1918, at least in terms of like how Europe functioned. World War I was a far greater break than 1900 was. But anyway, that said, there was still a lot of change happening. Changes in banking, voting, technology, social structures. There was a lot of change happening. While at the same time, those at the top believed that they feared that there was going to be a radical shakeup, which would result in them losing their power, potentially revolution, and can't have that. And this began as early as the 1870s. Well, technically 1880, but Germany's creation began in the 1870s. Europe began adjusting to the new power that was Germany, new technologies. 1876 had the four-stroke gas engine, telephone, incandescent lamp by 1879. Again, just because there are now these technologies doesn't mean they're really widely available until much later. But this does mean that this technology is beginning its spread throughout Europe, and it's changing people's lives for better or worse. I love drowning in the middle of class. All right. So, technology was increasing, prices were falling, wages were rising. Good stuff across the board. Europeans had found new ways. Europeans were finding new freedom to move about. Between 1871 and 1891, about 27.6 million moved outside of Europe, which became known as a Caucasian tsunami, which is quite a name. Now, again, going back to like my American history course, we actually talk about this shift in immigration to America. Fewer Irish and German, and more, well, Italy and Scotland. But we actually talk more about like Greece and Russia and Poland, etc. Now, they didn't all go to the U.S. Again, in my U.S. course, we obviously mostly focus on that, but they did go all over the world. Many of them did go to the United States seeking fortunes. Some did make a fortune, such as Joseph Pulitzer. Most, though, lived and died in the slums that they found themselves in when they arrived. They worked for starvation-level wages, never quite making enough to get by. Again, the United States was not the only place people went. Between 1971 and 1914, 4.5 million Europeans moved to Argentina, 4.6 million to Canada, 2 million to Australia and New Zealand, 1.5 million to Northern Africa, and 2 million Russians moved west to Siberia. Why? That one doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess if you really want to get out of the city, go to freaking Siberia. But, like, that's a punishment usually? I don't know, man. Anyway, there's Joseph Pulitzer, if you wanted to know what he looked like. Oh, and here's a real painful map looking from the north down, and it just shows the various waves of immigration, mostly from Europe. It also shows, like, out of Asia, etc. But obviously we're focusing on Europe for this class. Okay, so the metropolis at the turn of the century. Again, this is reminiscent of what we talk about in my American history course. As we near the turn of the century, there was a mass movement of people within the various European countries, particularly from the countryside into the cities. London is the best example, because, I mean, it was already a fairly, it's been a decent-sized city since, like, the Viking times. That was when it was, I don't think it was founded in the Viking times, but, like, it was properly built up into the major city that it became. So the thing about these cities, we specifically talk more about this in my American history course, but this wave of population shift in America and Europe are basically identical, so I can speak of them pretty much the same way. As these population centers grow, as more people move to these cities, and more people are there, it increases the speed at which mechanization happens, the speed at which things are becoming industrialized. It also means that since there's more people there, there needs to be more housing, more stuff needs to be built to accommodate the people. So that means that there are more construction jobs for stuff to be built. And since the city now has more jobs, more people move in from outside the city to take those jobs. But then that means there's more people in the city, which means more stuff needs to be built, which means more jobs are open, so more people move in and take those jobs, which just repeats the cycle. So it creates this vortex almost of opportunity, where people are coming from the countryside, which again, farming has never been super stable, where people are going into the cities to not only find opportunity, but their very presence is creating opportunity for more people. And again, these urban centers grew extremely quickly compared to the Middle Ages, where they were sort of around, and then they went away, and then they came back, and then they went away. Over the course of several centuries, here, over the course of a couple of decades, they exploded. Bathtubs, electricity, telephones were shipped to the upper class. Lower classes were in disease-ridden slums. There were a number of public works programs that tried to make things a little better for the people at the bottom. But more importantly, at least when it comes to the creation of the cities, not necessarily more importantly for the people trying to survive, mass transit. We have commuting now, sort of. The world's first subway system was the London Underground. It was opened in 1863, and on its opening day carried 30,000 people, which, for a subway, again, the world's first subway in 1863, that's a lot of people. For what was essentially at the time an untested, I mean, there were trains before then, obviously, but to have something running underground that they had never done before, and that many people were like, yeah, let's do it. Freaking London, man. So we've got some early city streets. I have a lot of images of this from my American history course, where you've got essentially modern buildings, maybe a bit old-fashioned, but fairly modern. And then you have horses and wagons, because that's what they had for the majority of the time. And then you have, this is Vienna. I distinctly remember this being Vienna. This is the capital of Austria, where you have the streets are just packed with people. The cars are very much relegated to whatever little bit of room they've got. And you've also got like the big brands, Kodak, Philips back there. I feel like there was another one. There's, I don't recognize that one. Here's the building of the London Underground, which again was a whole endeavor. I've seen documentaries on it. It's, once again, people were killed in the process of making this thing because, you know, drilling under the ground is dangerous work. This is a modern image that's just in black and white for, you know, vintage points. But you can see people here on the platform with their smartphones. But this is a refurbished model of the original train that was made back in 1863. Obviously, it's not powered by coal anymore, because you will choke people out if you're running a coal-powered train underground. But it does have a little, like, steam thing there to make it at least look authentic. And this is a really fun image of just how sort of creepy they call it the tube, because of, you can see the subway tunnels are just round. Anyway, just people hanging out on the platform, waiting on the train. Anyway, literal mobility was not the only thing in these metropolises. There was also a bit of social mobility. People had higher wages. There were new job opportunities. So people were able to move up socially. And again, with the cities both figuratively and literally expanding rapidly, there was a rapidly expanding middle class. So there was a rapidly expanding need for people to work these middle class jobs. Lawyers, doctors, shopkeepers, etc. Again, this is 1800s, so lawyers and doctors weren't like super high paying jobs, but it was pretty good. It was certainly better than being a farmer. But it wasn't like today where like that's pretty top of the line jobs. But it was upper middle class. And the major force behind social mobility was education. Being able to have an educated populace was the secret behind being able to keep your country moving. Even the most absolutist monarchs understood that to have an educated population was good, because you can't have a bunch of illiterate peasants build you an industrial nation. That isn't going to work. It doesn't work that way. You can't have a bunch of illiterate peasants like build a railroad, but you need people who know what they're doing to design the railroad. Obviously, the level of education and how restricted the education was depended on the ruler and the country. Of course, with, say, Russia, it was far, far less. But places like, say, England, typically, there was much more universal education. It also depended on how rich the family was. You know, if you were upper class, you had better access to education and far more opportunity than if you were working class. If you were born in the slums, you weren't going to go to, you know, trying to think of a fancy college in England. Yale, I guess. No, Yale's here. I don't know. You're not going to go, you know, to a fancy, expensive university, because you're not going to get an education of a high enough level to even get in, because it's segregated, essentially, by class. And it kind of still is. Like, there's scholarships and stuff, but if you've got a rich family, you just get to bypass all that. There was some improvement for women. A number were able to work independently, which was not a thing before. You know, before women worked just sort of as a part of a household. They still, you know, worked in factories and stuff, but like as part of like either a daughter working with her family, or a wife working with her husband. In this time period, women were able to work for their own benefit. There were other women, like the suffragettes, who pushed for the right for women to vote, and compared to like the women here in America who pushed for the right to vote, the suffragettes were, well, I'll get to it when we get to the picture. I don't want to spoil it. So here we have some children in a classroom. They all they're having a great time. Children in classrooms never change. And here we have some women working. This looks like, typically when you have images of like women working in the 1800s, it's like, you know, textile mills or whatever. This looks like a damn machining factory. Like that's not a textile mill. Those are machining lathes. Like they're making metal bits for machines. So that's kind of cool. This was a common job for women of the era. Typist, I think, is the term. Women that work on the typewriters. That said, this ain't a great setup, because especially here, but you see it all down the line. The typewriter on the other side will absolutely eat your paper if it falls into the typewriter across from you. Typewriters are angry machines. The keys want to eat your hands. The part with the paper wants to eat the paper. The part with the ink wants to explode. typewriters hate existing and they hate you. Um, that has been my experience with typewriters. What's that? They are cool, but they weigh like 25 pounds. The keys want to eat your fingers, um, and the paper getting the if you don't get the paper stuck, you're not doing it right. You take it out and you start over. Um, or you take it out and you cross out the word that you messed up on, and then you like go in and just sort of like redo it after. They're eventually when they made whiteout, you would take it out and then like white out and then like type over that once it dried. They, I think today, I mean there are still like modern typewriters today for, you know, hipsters that have like a whiteout in the thing, so you can just hit like a backspace and it will just clack whiteout over. But yeah, no, back then, like this image, if you've messed up, you take it out, you tear it up, you throw it away. No, because paper and ink were expensive. But also, like, if you made a typo, you just kept going. Like, whatever. It happened. Here we have the suffragettes. Votes for Women meeting. Here we are. Deeds, not words, through thick and thin when we begin. The bill, the whole bill, nothing but the bill. Strive and hold cheap the bargain. Arise, go forth and conquer. This wasn't just aggressive language. They were violent. This is specifically, well, these would, the flags look like French flags, but this is obviously in English, so I don't know what's going on here. I would assume these are British suffragettes. They were violent. Like they would throw stuff like at members of parliament, and they got their way. I mean, the Britain. See, when did Britain give women the right to vote? 1918, 1916. It was before us. It was a little bit before us, not that long before us, but yeah, suffragettes were something else. All right. And as far as the making of mass society, here we have the mass culture. This is what we're talking about with that. So, now I did just a moment ago say paper and ink were expensive. They weren't as expensive as they used to be, because like it was prohibitive to be printing books and stuff. You could now print newspapers and sell them cheap enough for people to actually be able to buy them and still make a profit. So they were cheaper. And also people could read more. And since people could read, they were more likely to buy your stuff. So more people could read. Newspapers were cheaper to print, which meant that you could, again, sell them for cheaper, so more people would have access to them. This mass culture began. Scandal and sensationalist stories sold more papers, so many newspapers, instead of just like telling the news, specifically described affairs, exotic travels, murder trials. You know, they were about excitement and not just, you know, oh, they're building a road down Bloominghamshire today. Who gives a crap about the road? Tell me about, you know, Duke whoever having an affair.
I got a question.
Yes.
So, you know how nowadays people write books and stuff?
Hmm.
Like, how do they get it into, like, the book paper? Like, do they just type it out, like, regular printed paper, and then send it over to somebody, and they make, like, the book and, like, the pages and
Like the
stuff?
binding?
Yeah, and, like, they put it in, like, book paper.
Yeah. Well, like if you mean today, it's they send a file, and they print it in whatever size they're going to print it in. But like back then, um, you type it as whatever size it's going to be, and then they bind it with usually it's glue or whatever. That's like that, and you just do it a bunch of times.
Oh, so if you make a book, you have to do the typing.
Well, no, if today, if you were to write a novel, no, you do it the one time, and you have like a file. Like when you write a paper for me, you have a file and you send it to me. Um, you send that to a publisher, and they publish it for you.
So they make the book and stuff.
Yeah, and they print it and distribute it and whatnot.
So you have to do everything, like you have to like create like you have to tell them what you want the title, like
Yeah.
on paper.
Yeah. Yeah, you do the writing. Now, you usually would hire like an art, unless you do the art yourself. You usually hire like an artist for the title or the front cover, and then you have to pay for distribution and like where it goes. Like I'm sure Barnes and Noble has like a certain fee for putting it in their stores and whatnot, um, that sort of thing.
So why do authors don't get don't get money?
Because the publisher, to work with a publisher, it's like record deals with a lot of musicians. The publisher usually takes like, I don't know the exact details, but they usually take like a large chunk of the actual profit. Because if you were to, like if I were to write a book, right, I don't have the equipment or the money to print out dozens or hundreds of the book and send them to stores all over the country. But if I work with a publisher, they take care of that. But then they get most of the money. Nope. That's just how it works. That's why a lot of people that write stuff anymore are just like, I'm just going to put this online. If you want to read it, you can read it. I'm going to make as much money just putting it out for free as I would with a publisher.
I wanted to write a book. Like I started writing it distracted.
Yeah. Yep. I was able to find the full works of Lovecraft, just EPUB for free. It's like, here. That's a big thing. Heck yeah, that's what I've been doing with my roommate. Keep her from going stir crazy. We've just been going to the library.
And they got good books there.
Hmm. I mean, obviously the one in Florence, in the library there is huge. Yeah, but I mean it's like registering for a website. You just give them your name and your address, and there you go. Like you don't have to pay anything to register at a library. The library is great. It's got all sorts of resources for stuff. It's got like job resources. Apparently, I don't know if this is a thing here in America, but apparently, like in Canada at least, you can rent tools from the library. Like if you're like working on. Yeah. 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 So if you need to do stuff. Right. Yeah, that's really because yeah, you can't afford that crap. But if you just need to use it and then bring it back, yep, that's great. Libraries are great. Um, in addition to reading, music became more widely available. Also, I know I can't speak on music, um, but I know at least my college library up in Rhode Island, um, you could rent. Well, again, not rent, but like just check out DVDs. I um, I watched a bunch of like old historic movies while I was up there doing grad school. So that was fun. It's just they again it just has all sorts. You just gotta just go there and ask. It's like, hey, you got all sorts of neat things.
I think I seen some of the, I think on TikTok somebody came to like, I think the library or was it company, and they asked for a scholarship to help them in school and they donated to them.
I can see that. Yeah, libraries are great. Right, we talked about music expanding outside of churches and royal courts a little bit before. Um, Music halls and public houses. That's where pubs comes from, by the way. Pub is short for public house. Originally, where people would come out and gather and listen to live music. The drinking just sort of naturally happened. In fact, when I was in Ireland, I think we were. It was when we were in Cork. Um, we were in a pub and there was a couple of guys like in the corner playing. I think they were playing guitar. I don't know. It's been a little while now. But the tradition for people playing music in a pub is you get free drinks until you can't play music anymore. So you're entertainment until you're too drunk to entertain. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the drinking age in Ireland's like 16, so yeah. The drinking age in most of Europe is like 16. Because it's not stigmatized there, so it's not like they don't have issues in Europe like they do here.
Yeah, America did.
Yeah.
It used to be 18 that you could get nicotine, now it's 21.
Yep. Because that's certainly the issue. Uh, right. Um, yeah. So people just go to pubs to listen to music, reproduction of music and songs. Um, Visual arts became more accessible. There were new and affordable museums. Because again, before art was like some of the biggest places that held art were like the Vatican. I mean, even to this day, the Vatican's got a lot of art, and that's kind of restricted. Um, but with this, a lot of new museums were built. People could go in and enjoy the art. Um, and also, this is when dry plate photography happened. Dry plate photography is a step above the old, like where they've got the big thing with the flash powder, and it's this whole contraption. Um, and then you have to take the film to the dark room, and it takes like days to develop. With the dry plate photography, bleh, um, it's a little simpler, and it also doesn't take like multiple seconds to actually take the picture, so you can just like snap the photograph. Certainly not like a modern day camera, but we're getting there. That said, 1895, motion pictures became a thing. we had the first movies. Auguste and Louis Lumiere created the first movie in 1895, which, if I remember right, was a train robbery film. It was just a silent film of a train robbery happening. It was really, really exciting for the first ever motion picture to happen. And since then, obviously, it's been a major form of art. All right, let's see. I want to say, like, the first motion picture also, like, caused a lot of, people freaking out because you've got moving pictures on a screen. I know the first cartoon freaked a lot of people out because they didn't understand what they were seeing. They thought like maybe they were puppets or something. It's like, what? These aren't people, because like it was very obviously not live people moving around. It confused a lot of folks. It's like they understand rotoscope, because that's old, where you just look through the thing and you see the moving image, but to have it like up on a screen was very new. It's very interesting to sort of see these first time things happen and human perception have to shift. So we have mass society. We have most everyone, learning about these new things, music and art and movies even. There was, of course, the freaking hipsters. Those that were avant-garde. They were ahead of the rest in terms of culture, taste, refinement, the snobs. There was also this modernism. Again, this is another philosophy. We're just literally going back to the previous philosophy and saying, hey, that thing doesn't make sense. Our new thing is better, and we know more about the world now, which is just going to change in the next philosophy, but whatever. So modernism is an interesting sort of thing, because it's very Sigmund Freud, where it's very just like, oh, there's these deep drives of the subconscious, there's these mysteries, and there's these parts of the world we just can't know. It's like, all right, that's cool, I guess. It's just the world's mysterious, and we don't understand our own minds even. And that's like it. And that's called modernism? I don't know. As far as art, there was lots of different art happening around the turn of the century, one of which was Art Nouveau, which is literally just means new art, which is a hell of a term for art that's 100 years old now. And also, of course, symbolism, which has always been a thing in art, but this was much more the symbolism was like the point. Where before, like, you would have like a picture of like you would have a portrait of a married couple, for example. And the point of the portrait was there's a married couple there. But then in the portrait would be like a dog, which means fidelity. So you would it would imply like they're a happy married couple and they're faithful to one another. And you would also have like maybe a tree in the background that would imply, a long life or like fertility. They're going to have a bunch of children, long happy marriage, etc. But that wasn't the point. That's just added stuff because that's what art is. Symbolism, the point of the art is a bunch of symbolic crap. It's just the painting. Symbolic images, mythological figures like the Sphinx. This just meant to represent mysteries. Like the human mind, again. I think I've got an image of these paintings. They're specifically the Isle of the Dead, which is apparently reproduced symbolist painting. I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, yes, that's literally the next image is the one that's in the book, so I'll get to that in just a second. So literature tended to focus on the impending disaster. Obviously, nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. Nobody was like, oh, there's a world war about to happen. But everyone knew something was stirring. Europe was reaching newer and greater heights, faster and faster, more changes happening at greater and greater speeds. Something's got to give. And I mean, also, as we're going to see later in this chapter, not just like technology and art and whatever, but there's also very obvious military buildup. And there's multiple groups that are kind of just waiting on something to happen. So, yeah, the literature of the day was making this plain. Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray is one example of this. It has a decadent aristocrat who would escape to a life of vice. If I remember right, he had a portrait of himself that would like take all the negative consequences of his life, and the portrait would like age instead of him. But eventually, it comes back to bite him, and he super rapidly ages like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I do need to eventually read Picture of Dorian Gray. Anyway, this is the image that's in the book. It's actually not the exact image, because the book specifically says this endlessly reproduced symbolist painting, but it's like the same. It's got the trees, it's got the rocks, it's got the little guy on the boat, which, by the way, anybody want to hazard a guess as to who the little guy on the boat would symbolize? There's a little boat here. Yeah, there's a little guy here actually moving the boat, and there's a person standing in the boat. Well, the entire image is called the Isle of the Dead. So who would be moving someone across a body of water in a boat? Charon, the river Styx, the Greek, yeah. I mean, he was essentially the Grim Reaper in Greek myth.
So basically that picture symbolizing like they enter the
Yeah, they're being carried to the afterlife. Yeah, it's a mythological theme, a surreal rendering of a medieval Mediterranean scenery, invited viewers to contemplate the elemental mystery of death. Sigmund Freud and Vladimir Lenin each had a copy. And I mentioned that it's not exactly the same because, again, it's been reproduced a bunch of times, and apparently not just like copied because they didn't have photocopiers. They just, I guess, repainted it, because it's not exactly the same as the one in the book. There's less trees in this one. The one in the book, there's like, you can see there's a little archway here. There's like some archways up here in the one in the book. These little pillars are taller in the one in the book. So that's not important, but I'm saying that because, like, again, as we were talking about with like making books specifically back then, typos weren't super important. Apparently neither were getting the exact details of a painting the same, because it's the same painting, it's the same general thing, the guy in the boat moving the soul across to the Isle of the Dead. Exactly. Yep. Because you have people that's like, oh, well, I died and then it came back and I saw these things. It's like, okay, but maybe it was your brain firing off, like, because people have dreams like that and they very much alive. So, who knows?
Maybe there's some people that after death they think everything is just black.
Yeah.
You ever like wake up in a sleep and don't even remember that you were asleep? You know that?
Oh yeah.
That feeling?
Oh, I often don't have dreams, and I've quite a few times. I remember, especially when I was younger, I was looking at the clock. It was like 8, 9 o'clock at night. I closed my eyes, opened them back, and it was 7 in the morning. Like, what?
Oh, that's crazy, man. Like, just
Yeah.
come back.
I just blinked. It's like, oh, I hate that. I don't feel like I slept at all. Didn't even have time to toss and turn. What? This is a common example of Art Nouveau. This was by Alphonse Mucha. Most of his early work, if you can tell from this, were advertisements. This is a cigarette ad. Yeah. Yeah, the cards are based on a lot of this old art. Because I do have this fan rendition of Nausicaa in Art Nouveau style. If you've not seen Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, you should see it. It's a really good movie. It's a Studio Ghibli movie. All right. Let's see. Ah, yes. So there were a number of artists like author Rimbaud and Paul Gauguin who simply left Europe to, quote, be rid of everything that is artificial and conventional. Because again, there were people at this time that were like, oh, we gotta go out and be just really snobby. So they moved to, I think they moved to tropical islands. Oh, here we go. Yeah, they went to Tahiti. No, sorry. Rimbaud went to Java, and Gauguin went to Tahiti. And I'll just say they really enjoyed the women. Yeah. So oh, we're too good for Europe. Yeah. All right. However, others who remained in Europe wanted to escape convention, which they saw as stifling artistic creation, by challenging convention, by changing it from within. We have, of course, Picasso, Pablo Picasso, and Picasso's got a lot of pieces. There's another one that I will discuss when we get to, well, we're not. I want to briefly go over a little bit of World War II before the end, even if it's not going to be on the final. And we'll talk more about Picasso later. But one piece we're going to talk about is the Les des. It's the women of Avignon, essentially, or the ladies of Avignon. It was going to be the whores of Avignon, because that's who it's about. It's the working girls in Avignon. And he viewed the subjects as though it was through a pane of broken glass, because they were broken. They were people in a desperate situation whose lives were in shambles, and they were just surviving. They weren't living lives by their own merits, by their own means, I should say, not by their own merits. That makes it sound like they're being given what they've got. No, they're just surviving. They're just scraping by, and that's what the image represents. I've got the picture in a minute. I'll discuss it more when we get there. Architecture, interestingly, went in the opposite direction. Rather than being more ornate, we have Walter Gropius's Foggus Factory. He has an awful last name. Molded form and function to create a utilitarian structure with lots of open space for windows. I'll show you in a minute. It's, again, looking at it today, it's like, okay, it's a boring factory, but it was the first of its kind, so, it is what it is. And then, of course, we had poetry by William Butler Yeats, sought to evoke the mysterious and mythological. W.B. Yeats is or I guess I should say was, because he's not around anymore. He was an Irish poet, and I distinctly remember that because when I was in Ireland, where was I at? I think it might have also been Cork. I was wandering around, and I wandered into a museum, and there was like an entire floor dedicated to W.B. Yeats. And it's hard to have a museum dedicated to a poet because you just have like little displays with like his poems in them. You don't have like, because Picasso, you have art, right? You have visual things to look at. With like poetry, it's writing on a page. Yes, that's the. He also drew inspiration, as I said on the notes, but I didn't actually bring up, from like African masks to kind of like distort the faces. But yeah, also as you can see, the distortion is like you're looking through glass that has been broken, and so it's the light is distorted. Because again, these women were in a broken situation. And there's another image that I'll again show you guys later that Picasso did. And Picasso is about where I draw the line when it comes to art, because then it starts getting into the modern art. I think I mentioned this before, where it's like it's a blue square and a yellow rectangle, and it represents like the meaninglessness of life. I'm like, that doesn't, no. That's a couple of shapes on a page. You can't charge $20,000 for that. But yeah, that's the point when modern art, I can't, that doesn't mean anything to me. This to me can still mean things. It's very deliberately done in a way that means things. The Foggus Factory, again, it's just like, that's just a regular ass factory. But before this, they didn't have these big windows. They weren't, having natural light in a factory is nice. When before you didn't. So yeah, and it's still around. It's in Germany, as you can tell from the flag. Honestly, I'm surprised it survived 2 world wars. But yeah, that's the Foggus Factory. I don't actually know what they make. The book doesn't say what they make in the Foggus Factory. I could probably look it up, but I never thought about it. Desire to move decorative clutter and allow natural light to penetrate the structure's interior. Oh, I forgot. I talked about W.B. Yeats. There was music. We talked a little bit about music already with pubs and whatnot. However, the big music of the day was ballet. Obviously music and performance. But in particular, ballet from Russia. The book specifically says, is it? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Strauss's opera Salome, leading lady exalts in kissing the dead lips of John the Baptist were also highly controversial. Yeah. What do we have? Oh, Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. Handsome Russian ballet dancer Alexander Nijinsky danced the piece, barefooted with overtly sexualized gestures in Paris. Performance caused a sensation and revolution. Rite of Spring provoked a riot. So yeah, the Parisians either loved it or literally rioted. Parisians are something else. So either they're going to literally revolutionize the way they do one of their oldest forms of art because they love your stuff so much, or they're going to burn the theater down. Average day in Paris. Did you say Philly? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Good thing the Pope wasn't from Philly, or they really would have destroyed the city. And Chicago got lucky there. They're lucky they're not Philly, is what I'm saying. Oh, my leg. Glad my leg just gave out. Ugh. All right. Let's get a little further. Emil Durkheim discussed the increased rates of suicide in the West, which he attributed to anomie, I think is how that's pronounced. Which, again, if this is French, who freaking knows? Basically, alienation, the loss of cultural glues that held society together, which is, again, just is the fault of Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution so rapidly and dramatically changed society and how people relate to one another that people are checking out. Gustave Le Bon worked on the behavior of crowds, the individual losing reasoning to how leaders could direct mobs. That's actually, Gustave Le Bon's piece is actually at the end of the chapter. Where's it at? Yeah, Gustave Le Bon, The Crowd. Basically, don't remember if it's from Le Bon or if it was a more modern research piece on crowds. But essentially, when you've got a group of people, like a large group of people, the average reasoning is essentially that of like the lowest reasonable person in that crowd. Like you can have a bunch of people there that normally, if you were talking to them one-on-one, would be reasonable and like very easy to convince to not be a violent psychopath. But once you've got a crowd of a bunch of screaming, frothing at the mouth people, that just drops. And then also how leaders of crowds don't actually lead the crowd, but just divert the flow in certain directions. Like you don't lead a mob the way you would lead an army. Like you can't lead a mob strategically, but you can focus their attention in a certain direction. Like say, I don't know, march down Philadelphia Avenue. I don't know. Just as a suggestion. We of course have Sigmund Freud, which we are not going to put a lot of effort into, because while he was certainly important in like the very early foundational stuff behind psychology, pretty much everything he talked about has been debunked. Yeah, there's a lot behind him, subconscious fears, desires, etc. We're not going to bother with that. He had a lot of takes, and I think a lot of it was a him problem. I think a lot of it was also that opium was widely legal and used by everyone. It's my same response to, why Edgar Allan Poe was the way he was. It's just that everyone was on opium. Henri Bergson described the brain as not operating according to logic, but instead fluid, which, considering we just talked about Freud, yeah. Louis Pasteur developed vaccinations for rabies and anthrax. Heating milk and wine to prevent bacterial growth or pasteurization. There's another thing. I keep getting this mixed up with penicillin. Penicillin was the thing that was made by accident. It is kind of a go-to antibacterial medicine that can treat all sorts of stuff. That the guy that made it or discovered it by accident. He was doing experiments with bread mold, I believe, and accidentally left one of his experiments open, and it grew. No, it didn't grow the mold, and he was wondering why it didn't do that. So he figured out what was going on and discovered penicillin, and very specifically, when he presented it to be patented, made sure that people couldn't profit from it because he wanted to make sure that everyone could get penicillin for as cheaply as possible, because he understood what was going to happen to the medical problems in America. And I think penicillin is actually really expensive today because somebody ended up buying the rights to penicillin and jacked up the price anyway. I can see that. Was it Mountain Dew? It was either Mountain Dew.
Coca-Cola was used as a medicinal supplement.
Okay. I feel like Fanta might have been one too.
And that's what the medicine substance is.
Well, it wasn't cocaine. It was coca. It was the plant that cocaine comes from. So it's related, very closely related, but they didn't make raw cocaine and dump it in the vat. But we were one step away from that. Yes. I feel like it's a pretty broad term. Yeah. 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 Ask for a Coke, they bring you a Pepsi. It's the same thing. I also just really quickly skipped over some really advanced physics things because that's not what this class is about, but I had to mention Max Planck, Niels Bohr, and freaking Albert Einstein because they shifted Newtonian physics and basically created probability in physics, so where physics isn't something that is always 2 plus 2 is 4. There's a lot of other things happening, and the end result is probably this thing, essentially. And that is a really, really basic summary of probability physics. I never got that far in physics, so I'm not going to get too much into that. Friedrich Nietzsche, philosopher who spoke of will to power, this thing lay behind all philosophies and religions. He was kind of a nihilist, and also kind of a sociopath. I worked with a guy who was super into Nietzsche, and I didn't trust this guy. Yeah, it made sense that he was really into Nietzsche, is all I will say about that guy. Anyway, there was a lot of things happening in the sciences, essentially. You got Freud, and again, if we want to Freud, hey man, that's a big old cigar you're holding there. Anything you want to talk about? I guess that's Louis Pasteur. No, Henri Bergson. That's Pasteur. I recognize Pasteur because of the mustache. All right. That'll do for now. We will continue next time with the new economies of the turn of the century, which will get us back into the socialism thing again, as well as the second industrial revolution. So a lot going on.
It said right here,
Mhm.
consider applications of type or printed. Is this count? I think it's printed. I think it's counted. Is it type or printed? What does that mean?
I mean, I would assume like printed.
Like not necessarily just regular writing?
I would have thought like printed out on a thing, but if it,
He said type or printed.
hold on, I'm gonna end the stream before I. All right, see you guys on Wednesday.